Anyone can get a costume. You don't fit the profile.
Officer, my flight is scheduled for departure. You can scan my badge right here, or you can call operations.
Don't tell me how to do my job. You people always have an answer, don't you?
The air at gate B42 was thick with the controlled chaos of departure. The low hum of the jet engines on the tarmac bled through the thick terminal glass, a promise of movement and destination. Passengers, a river of rolling suitcases and quiet anxieties, flowed toward the jet bridge, their faces a mixture of fatigue and anticipation. It was 9:47 a.m., and the sun cast long, clean stripes of light across the polished floor of the terminal. Everything was on schedule. Everything was normal. Captain Marcus Thorne felt the familiar rhythm of the pre-flight routine settle over him. At 52, with over 20,000 hours logged in the sky, the airport was as much his office as the cockpit itself. His uniform was immaculate, a crisp white shirt, the 4 golden stripes on his epaulets gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and a perfectly knotted tie. He walked with an economy of motion, a calm confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a deep, unshakable competence. His flight, a cross-country journey to San Francisco, was nearly boarded. He was the last piece of the puzzle, the commander walking to his post. He rounded the corner of the gate desk, giving a brief professional nod to the gate agent, a woman named Sarah, who returned it with a respectful smile. The jet bridge beckoned, a sterile tunnel leading to the aircraft. But his path was suddenly, unequivocally, blocked. Standing directly in his way was a security officer. He was younger than Marcus, maybe late 30s, with a compact, muscular build that strained the fabric of his dark blue uniform. His head was shaved, and a meticulously trimmed goatee did little to soften a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. His name tag read, Jensen. A holstered firearm sat high on his hip, and his hand rested casually on the grip, a gesture that was meant to look relaxed but felt like a warning. Officer Jensen's eyes, a flat, pale blue, scanned Marcus from head to toe. It wasn't the standard professional glance of a security check. It was a look of appraisal, of dissection, and it was steeped in a thick, oozing disbelief. He didn't see the 4 stripes or the pilot's wings pinned above the breast pocket. He saw something else, something that made his posture shift from relaxed to rigid. "Hold it right there," Jensen said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise of the concourse with the sharp edge of a blade. Marcus stopped instantly. He was trained for unexpected events, for checklists and protocols. He met the officer's gaze without aggression, his expression neutral. "Good morning, officer." Jensen didn't return the greeting. He took a half-step forward, closing the space between them, establishing dominance. "This is a secure crew access point. Where do you think you're going?" The question was absurd. The jet bridge behind him led to one place, the aircraft. Marcus gestured slightly with his head. "To my flight deck, officer. Gate B42. I'm the captain." A smirk flickered at the corner of Jensen's mouth. It was a dismissive, ugly thing. "You're the captain? That's a good one." He let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Let's see some ID, now." The word now was an order, sharp and unnecessary. Passengers filing past slowed their pace, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. Sarah, the gate agent, looked over from her podium, a frown creasing her brow. This was not normal. Crew members passed through this checkpoint 100 times a day with a simple nod. Marcus maintained his composure. Years of de-escalation training, of managing everything from turbulent skies to unruly passengers kicked in. He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his blazer, his movements deliberate and clear. "Of course," he said, his voice even. He produced his airline-issued identification badge and his FAA pilot's license, holding them out in his palm. The ID card had his photograph, his name, Captain Marcus Thorne, and a barcode for verification. The FAA license was a testament to decades of rigorous training and flawless execution. Jensen didn't take them. He stared at the credentials in Marcus's hand as if they were cheap forgeries. His eyes then flicked back to Marcus's face, a hostile glint in their depths. Anyone can get a costume, he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. You don't fit the profile. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. You don't fit the profile. It was a phrase loaded with unspoken meaning, an accusation wrapped in procedure. Marcus felt a slow burn begin in his chest, an anger he had learned to master long ago but could never fully extinguish. He was a man who had commanded multi-million-dollar aircraft through hurricanes and emergency landings. He had been trusted with the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And here, in the bright, sterile corridor of his own airport, he was being told he didn't belong, simply because the color of his skin didn't match the image in a security guard's mind. He held the IDs out, his hands steady. Officer, my flight is scheduled for departure. The passengers are on board. My first officer is waiting. You can scan my badge right here, or you can call the airline's operations center. They'll verify my identity in 30 seconds. Jensen's smirk hardened into a sneer. Don't tell me how to do my job. You people always have an answer for everything, don't you? He finally snatched the IDs from Marcus's hand, his fingers brushing against Marcus's with a rough, dismissive touch. The confrontation, born of one man's prejudice, was just beginning, and the glass wall of the terminal was about to become the backdrop for a humiliation that would be seen around the world. Officer Jensen held the two pieces of plastic, the sum of Marcus Thorne's professional identity, as if they were contaminated. He didn't look at the photo on the airline badge. He didn't read the name, Captain Marcus Thorne, printed in bold official lettering. He didn't register the FAA seal on the pilot's license. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, his eyes narrowed in a predator's squint, searching for a crack in the pilot's calm facade. The ID was merely a prop in a scene he had already written in his head. Cute, Jensen said, flipping the badge over in his fingers. He held it up to the light, not to inspect it, but as a gesture of theatrical suspicion. Looks real enough, I guess. Easy to print these things off the internet if you know what you're doing. The accusation was so blatant, so unprofessional, that for a moment Marcus was speechless. He could feel the eyes of the remaining passengers on him. He saw his first officer, a younger man named David Chen, pause at the entrance to the jet bridge, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. A flight attendant, Maria, who had flown with Marcus for years, also stopped, her hand frozen on the handle of her rollerboard bag. Officer, Marcus said, his voice dropping a register, the calm now layered with a thin sheet of ice. My name is Captain Marcus Thorne. My employee number is printed on that badge. The aircraft is right there. My crew is right there. There is no ambiguity here. Jensen ignored him, his attention still on the ID he refused to properly examine. What I see, he said slowly, as if explaining a complex problem to a child, is a man in a restricted area acting suspiciously. The only suspicious thing happening here is your refusal to perform a simple verification, Marcus countered, his patience wearing thin. Scan the card, make the call, do your job. The challenge in Marcus's tone, however professionally delivered, was like a spark on dry tinder. Jensen's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing near his temple. He looked up from the ID, his pale blue eyes locking with Marcus's. You want to tell me how to do my job? You think that uniform gives you the right to walk around here and give orders? He took another step forward, violating Marcus's personal space. The scent of stale coffee and mint gum emanated from him. On my watch, that uniform means you get extra scrutiny, especially when it doesn't look right on you. It doesn't look right on you. The phrase was a direct echo of his earlier, you don't fit the profile. It was the core of the issue, laid bare under the humming lights of the concourse. This wasn't about security. It was about Jensen's worldview, a narrow, poisoned perspective where a black man in a captain's uniform was an anomaly, a contradiction that his mind couldn't or wouldn't accept. David, the first officer, took a tentative step forward. Officer, is there a problem? That's our captain. We're already behind schedule. Jensen shot David a venomous look, a silent command to back off. He dismissed the white co-pilot with a flick of his eyes, his focus returning entirely to Marcus. The difference in treatment was stark and immediate. One pilot was a colleague, The other was a suspect. "Your little friend can't help you," Jensen sneered at Marcus. "This is a federal security checkpoint. I decide who passes." He pocketed Marcus's IDs, tucking away the very evidence that would exonerate him. It was a clear power play, an act of deliberate obstruction. "Give me my identification back," Marcus said, his voice now cold and hard. "You have no legal basis to hold me or my property." "I've got all the basis I need," Jensen retorted, his hand moving from his side and resting on Marcus's shoulder. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a firm, controlling grip, fingers digging into the muscle. "You're being detained for questioning." "On what grounds?" Marcus demanded, not moving, not resisting, but refusing to be intimidated. "Failure to comply, causing a disturbance, and impersonating an airline pilot." The last charge was a declaration of war. It was a direct assault on Marcus's identity, his career, his entire life's work. The absurdity of it was staggering. He was being accused of pretending to be what he in fact was by a man who was blinded by his own prejudice. Maria, the flight attendant, finally found her voice. "That's ridiculous. He's Captain Thorne. I've flown with him dozens of times." Jensen's head snapped toward her. "Ma'am, you need to board the aircraft or I'll have you detained for interfering with a security procedure." His threat was potent, and Maria fell silent, her face pale with a mixture of fear and outrage. The scene had reached a breaking point. The gate agent, Sarah, was on the phone, her voice a low, urgent murmur. Passengers had their phones out, the small red dots of recording lights blinking in the periphery. They were no longer just curious onlookers, they were witnesses. Jensen felt the audience and seemed to draw energy from it. This was his stage. He was the one in control. "I'm going to say this one last time," he said to Marcus, his voice low and menacing. "Put your hands on the glass. Now!" Marcus stood his ground. "I will not. You have no cause." "That's it," Jensen snarled. "You just made this a whole lot worse for yourself." He tightened his grip on Marcus's shoulder, preparing to use force. The IDs remained in his pocket, unseen and unverified, just as he intended. The truth was irrelevant. The performance of power was everything. The moment hung in the air, stretched taut and fragile. For Marcus, it was a moment of profound clarity. Every instinct honed over decades, in the cockpit, in life, screamed at him to remain calm, to not give this man the excuse he so desperately wanted. Resistance would be twisted into aggression. A raised voice would become a threat. He was trapped not by logic, but by the irrationality of pure bias. "Officer, you are making a grave mistake," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady baritone that carried the weight of finality. He planted his feet, a subtle shift of balance, preparing for the impact he knew was coming. Jensen saw the quiet defiance in his eyes, and it enraged him. He didn't want a calm, articulate man. He wanted a suspect who acted like one. With a grunt of effort, Jensen shoved Marcus forward. The force was sudden and violent, propelling Marcus off balance. He stumbled the 2 steps to the massive terminal window, his palms hitting the cool, hard glass with a flat smack that echoed in the now silent gate area. Gasps rippled through the crowd of passengers. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. A man in a business suit said loudly, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? He's the pilot!" Jensen ignored them all. His world had narrowed to this one act of domination. "I told you to put your hands on the glass!" he yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He pressed his knee into the back of Marcus's thigh, leveraging his body weight to pin the captain against the window. Marcus did not fight back. He kept his hands flat against the glass, his fingers splayed. Through the window he could see his aircraft, the majestic tail fin with the airline's logo painted in bold, confident colors. It was his ship, his responsibility, and it felt 1,000,000 miles away. He could see the ground crew moving below, oblivious to the drama unfolding just feet from the cockpit. "I am not resisting you," Marcus said, his voice slightly muffled against the glass. "There is no need for force." His words were fuel to Jensen's fire. The officer grabbed Marcus's right arm and wrenched it viciously behind his back. A sharp, searing pain shot through Marcus's shoulder. He grunted, the sound a low, involuntary expression of agony. He was a 52-year-old man in excellent physical shape, but this was a joint-twisting lock designed to inflict pain and ensure compliance. "Stop resisting!" Jensen barked, even as Marcus remained perfectly still. It was a script, a justification being created in real time for the benefit of the cameras he knew were watching. From his belt, Jensen produced a pair of steel handcuffs. The metallic rattle was a horrifyingly definitive sound in the quiet terminal. David, the first officer, started forward again, his face a mask of disbelief. "Stop! You can't do this! We have a flight to board! He's our captain!" "Get back!" Jensen shouted over his shoulder, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "One more step and you're next!" David froze, torn between his duty to his captain and the direct threat from an armed officer. Sarah, the gate agent, was now speaking frantically into her phone. "You need to get a supervisor to gate B42 immediately. An officer is assaulting our captain. He's putting him in handcuffs." The first cuff closed around Marcus's right wrist. The cold metal bit into his skin, tight and unforgiving. Jensen struggled for a moment with the other arm, yanking it back with such force that Marcus's face was pressed hard against the window. For a fleeting second, he saw his own reflection. A man in a pilot's uniform, a symbol of authority and trust, being treated like a common criminal. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave of shame that washed over him, followed by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. The second cuff clicked shut. It was done. Captain Marcus Thorne, a man with a spotless record and the respect of his peers, was now shackled, his arms painfully secured behind his back. Jensen cinched the cuffs tighter, a final act of petty cruelty. "You are being detained for impersonating a pilot and resisting a lawful order," Jensen said, breathing heavily, the words a formal, hollow pronouncement of his victory. He pulled Marcus away from the glass. The captain stumbled slightly, his balance compromised with his hands bound behind him. He stood there, in the middle of the concourse, in his full uniform, in handcuffs. The passengers stared, their phones held up, creating a digital constellation of silent witnesses. Their expressions were a mix of shock, outrage, and, for a few, a flicker of fear. If this could happen to a pilot, a figure of ultimate authority in their journey, then what did it say about their own safety and security? The sounds of the airport seemed to rush back in, the distant boarding calls, the rumble of suitcases, the murmur of 100 conversations. But in the immediate vicinity of Gate B42, there was only a stunned, horrified silence, punctuated by the quiet, metallic clinking of the handcuffs as Captain Thorne stood, wrongfully and shamefully bound. The click of that steel was the sound of a line being crossed, a sound that would trigger an earthquake across the entire airline industry. With Marcus now in restraints, Jensen's entire demeanor shifted. The frantic aggression was replaced by a cold, performative professionalism. He was no longer just a security guard, he was an officer in control of a captured suspect. He placed a firm hand between Marcus's shoulder blades, a gesture that was both a guide and a display of ownership. "Let's go," Jensen said, his voice low and devoid of the earlier manic energy. "We're taking a walk." He began to steer Marcus away from the jet bridge and back toward the main concourse. Every step was a fresh wave of degradation. Marcus kept his head high, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance, refusing to meet the eyes of the passengers who stared at him. He could feel their gazes like physical objects, a mixture of pity, confusion, and suspicion. The uniform that had once commanded respect was now a bizarre contradiction to the steel cuffs on his wrists, creating a spectacle of cognitive dissonance. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice strained from the awkward angle of his arms, "I am informing you again that I am the captain of Flight 815. You are delaying a commercial flight and unlawfully detaining a crew member. This will have severe consequences." Jensen leaned in close, his voice a conspiratorial whisper in Marcus's ear. "You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to play dress-up. Now shut your mouth. You can talk to the Port Authority police when they get here." He keyed the radio on his shoulder, his thumb pressing the button with practiced ease. Dispatch, this is Officer Jensen at Concourse B, Gate 42. I have one male in custody, possible 1053, impersonating airline personnel in a secure area. Suspect is non-compliant, requesting backup and transport to Central Holding. The radio jargon was a deliberate choice, designed to legitimize his actions. But the words he chose were loaded. Non-compliant. It was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to protect himself. Marcus hadn't been non-compliant, he had been resolute. He hadn't resisted, he had demanded verification. The distinction was critical, but in Jensen's official report, it would be lost. As they walked, the scene drew more and more attention. Travelers stopped in their tracks. Airport employees, baristas, shop clerks, baggage handlers paused their work to watch the unbelievable sight of a cuffed pilot being paraded through the terminal. The humiliation was intensely public, a deliberate part of the punishment. This wasn't just about detaining a suspect, it was about making an example. His crew watched him go, their faces etched with a helplessness that mirrored his own. David, the first officer, had his phone out, not recording but making a call, his voice sharp and urgent. Maria was speaking with the gate agent, Sarah, their expressions a mixture of fury and disbelief. They were his crew. He was responsible for them, and yet he was being led away like a felon, unable to command, unable to protect. The walk was only about 100 yards to a small, unmarked door tucked away between a newsstand and a currency exchange kiosk, but it felt like miles. With each step, the clinking of the chains between the handcuffs served as a grim soundtrack. Marcus focused on his breathing, a technique he used to manage stress at 30,000 feet. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. He would not give Jensen the satisfaction of seeing him break. A man in a pilot's uniform from another airline passed by, his eyes widening in shock. He knew Marcus. They'd flown together years ago. He stopped, his mouth agape. "Marcus, what in God's name is going on?" Before Marcus could answer, Jensen shoved him forward. "Keep walking. Mind your own business." The other pilot stood his ground. "That's Captain Thorne. He's one of the best pilots this airport has. You've made a mistake." "The only mistake," Jensen snarled back, "was him thinking he could talk his way into a cockpit where he doesn't belong." They reached the door, which read, "Security," in stark black letters. Jensen swiped a keycard and pushed the door open, prodding Marcus inside with a rough push. The room beyond was small, windowless, and smelled of disinfectant and stale air. As the door clicked shut behind them, sealing him off from the public concourse, Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. The public part of the humiliation was over. But as he looked at the bare walls, the single metal table, and the 2 plastic chairs, he knew the private part was just beginning. He was now alone with the man who had manufactured this entire crisis, a man who held all the power, at least for the moment. The walk was over, but the ordeal was far from finished. He was now in Jensen's world, a small, sterile box where bias was the only law that mattered. The security room was an oppressive, sterile cube. The walls were painted a dull, institutional beige, and the only light came from a humming fluorescent panel in the ceiling that cast everything in a flat, unforgiving glare. A single security camera was mounted in the upper corner, its small black lens an unblinking eye. The air was still and cool. Jensen pushed Marcus toward one of the hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor. "Sit," he commanded. Marcus complied, the movement awkward and painful with his arms cuffed behind him. The edge of the chair dug into his thighs. He sat upright, his posture straight, refusing to slump or show any sign of defeat. He was a captain, and even in this degrading situation he would carry himself like one. Jensen circled him like a shark, the silence in the room amplifying the sound of his boots on the linoleum floor. He hadn't called for backup to come to the room. The radio call had been for transport, a move to further isolate Marcus and drag the process out. For now, it was just the 2 of them. "The cuffs too tight?" Jensen asked, the question laced with mock concern. "They are," Marcus stated, his voice flat. "You're cutting off my circulation." Jensen stopped in front of him and leaned down, his face uncomfortably close. "Good." Maybe it'll help you think about the importance of respecting authority. He reached back and, with a quick, deliberate motion, squeezed the cuffs another click tighter. An involuntary hiss of pain escaped Marcus's lips. The metal now felt like it was grinding against bone. He clenched his jaw, battling the white-hot pain that radiated up his arms. This was no longer about procedure. This was personal. This was punishment. "So," Jensen began, pulling the other chair around and sitting down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Let's try this again. Who are you, and what were you really doing back there?" "My name is Captain Marcus Thorne," Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the pain. "I am the pilot in command of Flight 815 to San Francisco. My credentials, which you have in your pocket, will prove that." Jensen laughed, a short, ugly bark. "See, that's your problem. You keep sticking to that story. You've got this attitude, this air of authority like you think you're better than me. But the uniform doesn't make the man. I've seen guys like you before." "Guys like me?" Marcus asked, his eyes locking onto Jensen's. He knew the question was a risk, but he had to hear him say it. Jensen's gaze didn't waver. He didn't answer directly, but he didn't need to. His silence was a confession. He continued, "Guys who think they can bluff their way through life, walk into places they don't belong, flash some fake ID and expect everyone to just roll over for them. But your luck ran out today. You ran into me." "You ran into a pilot trying to do his job," Marcus corrected him. "You're the one who created this situation because you made an assumption based on my appearance." "I made an assessment based on 15 years of experience," Jensen shot back. "I saw a threat. My job is to neutralize threats." "A threat?" Marcus asked, the word hanging in the sterile air. "A 52-year-old man in a pilot's uniform with valid identification is a threat to you?" "Your attitude is a threat," Jensen insisted, his voice rising. "Your refusal to show immediate, unconditional compliance is a threat. This is a post-9/11 world. We don't have the luxury of giving people the benefit of the doubt anymore." It was a pathetic justification, a shield of national security used to hide a core of simple, ugly prejudice. He was twisting Marcus's professional calm into a sign of guilt, his demand for proper procedure into an act of defiance. Outside the room, the world was moving on without him. He could hear the faint, muffled announcement for the final boarding of a different flight. His own flight was now grounded. His passengers were stranded. His crew was in limbo. And it was all because of the man sitting in front of him, a man so convinced of his own righteousness that he was blind to the truth right in his pocket. The door to the room opened without a knock. A second officer, older and heavier set, with tired eyes and a graying mustache, peered in. His name tag read Miller. "Jensen, what's all this? Dispatch is getting frantic calls from United Operations about a detained captain." Jensen's posture stiffened. He stood up, turning to face the other officer. "It's under control, Sarge. I've got a possible impersonator here. Refused to identify himself properly at the gate." The lie was so effortless, so practiced. Marcus felt a surge of cold fury. Before he could speak, Sergeant Miller's eyes fell on Marcus, taking in the uniform, the 4 stripes, and the steel cuffs. His gaze lingered on the cuffs, and a deep frown formed on his face. He looked from Marcus to Jensen, and for the first time since the ordeal began, Marcus saw a glimmer of something other than hostility in an officer's eyes. He saw doubt. "His name is Captain Marcus Thorne," Marcus said, seizing the opportunity. "Flight 815. Officer Jensen has my pilot's license and my airline ID in his pocket. He has refused to verify them." Miller's gaze shifted to Jensen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was heavy with an authority that Jensen's lacked. "Is that true, Jensen? You have his credentials?" Jensen hesitated for a fraction of a second. "He was acting evasive, Sarge. I was following protocol." "The protocol," Miller said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is to verify the ID, not cuff the man first. Let me see the ID. Now." The dynamic in the windowless room had just irrevocably shifted. The unblinking eye of the camera in the corner continued to record as Jensen, his face hardening into a mask of resentment, slowly, reluctantly, reached into his pocket. The small, windowless room seemed to shrink as Sergeant Miller stepped fully inside, closing the door behind him. The air, already thick with tension, grew heavier. Miller was a man who carried his years of experience not as a burden, but as a cloak of quiet authority. He had seen everything the airport could throw at a cop, from frantic parents with lost children to genuine terrorist threats. He had a finely tuned instinct for trouble, and his instincts were screaming right now. Jensen's hand hovered over his pocket, his reluctance a palpable thing. He was like a child caught in a lie, desperately trying to find a way to maintain his story even as it crumbled around him. "Sarge, the situation was escalating. I made a judgment call based on the suspect's behavior." Miller held out his hand, his expression unyielding. "The ID, Jensen." With a final resentful glare at Marcus, Jensen pulled the credentials from his pocket and slapped them into Miller's outstretched palm. The sergeant took them and, for the first time since they had been taken from Marcus, looked at them properly. He studied the photo on the airline badge, comparing it to the man sitting in the chair. He read the name. He noted the FAA seal on the pilot's license. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. He looked up, his gaze moving from the plastic cards to Marcus's face, then to the painful-looking steel cuffs. "Captain Marcus Thorne," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. "Yes, Sergeant," Marcus replied, allowing a fraction of the immense relief he felt to show in his voice. "I've been trying to tell your officer that for the last 20 minutes. Miller's eyes, full of a weary disappointment, settled on Jensen. "Explain this to me, Jensen. Explain why a senior captain for United Airlines is sitting in your detention room in handcuffs." "His story didn't add up," Jensen insisted, his voice defensive. "He was argumentative. He didn't fit the—" "Didn't fit what, Jensen?" Miller cut him off, his tone sharp. "Didn't fit the uniform? This man has more hours in the sky than you have on this police force. The protocol is clear. Verify first. You skipped that step and went straight to force. Why?" Jensen's face flushed a blotchy red. "I used my discretion. He was causing a scene at the gate." "I was standing still," Marcus interjected, his voice firm. "Your officer was the one shouting and using physical force. There are dozens of witnesses, and I'm sure the gate cameras will confirm it." Miller nodded slowly, his gaze still locked on his subordinate. He had seen this before. He knew Jensen's reputation. A young officer, zealous and overly aggressive, with a complaint history that was just shy of triggering a formal review. He was a lawsuit waiting to happen, and it looked like the wait was over. "There's a computer terminal right here," Miller said, gesturing to a dusty desktop in the corner of the room. "And I have a radio. We can verify a crew member's status in 60 seconds. Did you make any attempt to do that?" "I was about to when he became non-compliant," Jensen lied again, digging himself deeper. "He was cuffed because he asked you to do your job," Miller stated flatly. He walked over to the desk, carrying Marcus's IDs. He tapped the spacebar on the keyboard and the monitor flickered to life. With surprising speed for a man his size, he typed in Marcus's name and employee number into the airport's shared database. The screen refreshed almost instantly, displaying a detailed crew manifest for United Flight 815. There, at the top of the list, was the entry: Thorne, Marcus J., Captain, PIC, Pilot in Command. Miller stared at the screen for a long moment, the green text reflected in his tired eyes. He let out a long, slow breath that sounded like the air escaping a punctured tire. He turned, his face a grim mask. "He's the damn captain, Jensen." Jensen stood ramrod straight, his expression a mixture of defiance and dawning horror. The digital, irrefutable truth on the screen had demolished the last pillar of his flimsy justification. "Now you listen to me," Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are going to take those cuffs off Captain Thorne right now. Then you are going to hand me your notepad, and you are going to go wait in the concourse until I come out. You will not speak to anyone. You will not touch your radio except to answer a direct call from me. Do you understand?" The color drained from Jensen's face. He had been so caught up in the exercise of his own power that he never anticipated such a swift and total reversal. He had expected a supervisor who would back his play, who would trust his instincts over the word of a man he had already judged. He had miscalculated badly. He hesitated for a second, a final flicker of rebellion in his eyes. "Now, officer," Miller commanded, his voice like rolling thunder. Jensen moved as if in a trance. He pulled the cuff key from his belt, his hands fumbling slightly. He unlocked the first cuff, then the second. The metal fell away with a clatter onto the linoleum floor. Marcus brought his arms forward, a wave of pins and needles washing over them as blood rushed back into his hands. He flexed his fingers, grimacing at the deep, angry red welts circling his wrists. He rubbed them slowly, the physical pain a dull echo of the profound humiliation he had endured. The door opened again. This time it was the gate agent, Sarah, and behind her stood a woman in a sharp business suit, her face a thundercloud of controlled fury. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Marcus and the red marks on his wrists. "Sergeant Miller," she said, her voice clipped and powerful. "I'm Evelyn Reed, the station manager for United. What in the hell is going on in here?" The supervisor's arrival had been the turning point, but the arrival of the airline's fury was about to turn a departmental problem into a corporate catastrophe. Evelyn Reed was a force of nature condensed into a 5'4" frame. In her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of absolute no-nonsense authority, she was responsible for every single United Airlines operation at this airport. A delayed flight was a problem. A grounded flight was a crisis. A grounded flight caused by one of her senior captains being assaulted and wrongfully detained by airport security was an act of war. She strode into the small room, her presence immediately commanding all the available oxygen. Her gaze swept past Sergeant Miller and landed squarely on Officer Jensen, who seemed to shrink under the intensity of her stare. Then, her eyes softened with concern as she turned to Marcus. "Captain Thorne, Marcus, are you all right?" she asked, her professional fury momentarily giving way to genuine human concern. "I will be, Evelyn," Marcus replied, his voice raspy. He was still rubbing his wrists, the red marks already beginning to bruise. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn's eyes dropped to his wrists, and her face tightened into a mask of cold rage. "They put you in restraints?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She looked at Sergeant Miller, demanding an answer. Miller, a man rarely intimidated, took a half-step back. "Ma'am, the situation is being handled. Officer Jensen was the detaining officer. The cuffs have been removed." Evelyn turned her laser-like focus back to Jensen. "You, officer, on what grounds did you place a uniformed United Airlines captain on his way to his own flight in handcuffs?" Jensen, now caught between a furious supervisor and an even more furious airline executive, struggled to find his footing. "Ma'am, I had reason to believe he was an impersonator. He was uncooperative." "Uncooperative?" Evelyn shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess. He failed to be sufficiently subservient when you accused him of being a fraud. Did he commit the egregious act of asking you to verify his credentials?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to Marcus. "Marcus, what happened? Exactly." Marcus recounted the events calmly and precisely, his pilot's training evident in the clear, factual, and chronological retelling. He described Jensen blocking his path, the immediate disbelief, the refusal to look at his ID, the derogatory comments, "You don't fit the profile. Anyone can get a costume," and the violent, unprovoked escalation that ended with him being cuffed against a window in front of his own passengers. As Marcus spoke, Evelyn Reed's expression grew colder and harder. She listened without interruption, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face, but Marcus knew her anger was being directed squarely at Jensen. With every word, the hole Jensen had dug for himself became a canyon. When Marcus finished, there was a heavy silence in the room. Evelyn took a deep breath, composing herself. She looked at Sergeant Miller. Sergeant, has this officer been on your force long? About 15 years, ma'am, Miller answered grimly. Does he have a history of complaints regarding racial profiling or excessive force? Miller hesitated, the code of professional loyalty warring with the undeniable disaster in front of him. There have been a few complaints. None were sustained. None were sustained, Evelyn repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Until today, because today his actions were witnessed by 24 passengers with smartphones, a gate agent, and an entire flight crew. Today his actions have grounded a transcontinental flight, potentially affecting the travel plans of 178 passengers and costing my airline tens of thousands of dollars in direct costs and an incalculable amount in reputational damage. She took out her phone and tapped the screen. I have already been forwarded 3 different video clips of this incident. The footage is unambiguous. She looked directly at Jensen. It shows you assaulting my captain. Jensen paled. The digital witnesses. He had been so focused on his physical dominance of now he was being dismissed like a disobedient child, stripped of his power in front of the very man he had sought to dominate. His eyes darted between Miller and Evelyn Reed, searching for an escape route, a way to rewind the last 30 minutes. There was none. He turned, his movements stiff and robotic, and walked out of the room. He didn't look at Marcus. He couldn't. Through the small window in the door, they could see him standing in the concourse, his back to them, his posture rigid with a mixture of anger and humiliation. The confidence had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter residue of a colossal error in judgment. With Jensen gone, the atmosphere in the room, while still tense, shifted. The immediate threat was gone. Now it was about dealing with the aftermath. Evelyn Reed's attention returned to Marcus. The crew has been informed that we're dealing with a security delay. We've held the flight. But I need to know, Marcus, after what you've just been through, are you fit to fly? There is absolutely no pressure. If you say no, we will find a replacement captain and you can take the rest of the day. Your well-being is the #1 priority. It was the question he had been asking himself. The physical pain in his wrists was fading to a dull ache, but the emotional and psychological toll was far heavier. The humiliation, the rage, the feeling of utter powerlessness, it was all churning inside him. But then he thought of the 178 passengers waiting on his aircraft. He thought of his crew. He thought of the decades he had spent proving he belonged in that uniform. Walking away now felt like letting Jensen win. Yes, Evelyn, Marcus said, his voice firm and clear. I am fit to fly. I want to fly. But I need this entire incident documented. I want every single detail on the record before I step into that cockpit. It will be, Sergeant Miller assured him, his voice heavy with contrition. I am filing a full supervisory report. Officer Jensen will be required to submit a statement. The body camera footage from his uniform and the terminal's CCTV footage are already being pulled and preserved as evidence. Evelyn nodded, her expression grimly satisfied. Good. We will be filing a formal complaint with the Airport Authority and the Port Authority Police Department. We will also be conducting our own internal investigation. She looked at Sergeant Miller. And, Sergeant, please inform your superiors of this. United Airlines is officially reviewing its security contract with your department at this airport, effective immediately. Miller's eyes widened slightly. This had escalated far beyond a single officer's misconduct. Terminating a security contract was a multi-million-dollar decision, a corporate earthquake. Ma'am, I understand your anger, but my department has served this airport for over 30 years. And in 30 minutes, one of your officers has destroyed that relationship, Evelyn replied without heat, stating it as a fact, not a threat. Our passengers and our crews have to trust the people assigned to protect them. Today, that trust was broken. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a symptom of a deeper problem that you have clearly failed to address. She turned back to Marcus. Let's get you to your aircraft. I'll walk with you. She paused and looked at the red marks on his wrists, which were now turning a dark shade of purple. Her voice softened again. I am so sorry this happened to you, Marcus. No one should ever have to endure this. Thank you, Evelyn, Marcus said, the simple words carrying a universe of meaning. As Sergeant Miller held the door open, Evelyn and Marcus stepped out into the concourse. The small crowd of onlookers that had gathered was still there, their chatter dropping to a respectful hush as they saw Captain Thorne emerge, no longer in cuffs, but flanked by the airline's station manager. Their expressions were of relief and support. One passenger started a scattered, spontaneous round of applause. As they walked the short distance back to gate B42, Marcus saw Jensen still standing where Miller had left him, talking animatedly into his radio. As they approached, Jensen fell silent, his eyes locking with Marcus's. The sneering arrogance was gone. In its place was a look of raw, undiluted hatred, the fury of a man who has been exposed and defeated. It was the look of a man who knew his career was likely over and was searching for someone to blame other than himself. Marcus met his gaze for a moment, his own expression unreadable, before turning his attention to the jet bridge ahead. He had a job to do. The weight of Jensen's decision had finally come crashing down. It was heavier than he could have ever imagined. It would cost him his job, his reputation, and it would cost his department a contract it had held for decades. The click of the handcuffs had been the sound of a trigger being pulled, and the bullet was still traveling. The walk down the jet bridge was a world away from the walk of humiliation Marcus had been forced to endure just a short time earlier. The confined space, usually a mundane corridor, now felt like a sanctuary. At the aircraft door, his first officer, David, and the lead flight attendant, Maria, were waiting. Their faces were etched with relief. "Captain," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "We didn't know what to do. Are you okay?" "I'm all right, David," Marcus said, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Let's focus on the job. Have you been in touch with dispatch?" "They're waiting for our word," David replied. "We've already missed our takeoff slot. They're working to get us a new one." "Good," Marcus said. "Get the pre-flight checklist started. I'll be there in a minute." He turned to Maria. "How are the passengers?" "Anxious," Maria admitted. "They all saw what happened. There's a lot of anger on your behalf, Captain."
But they're being patient.
"Thank you, Maria. Keep the cabin secure. I'll make an announcement as soon as we have an updated departure time." Evelyn Reed, who had walked with him to the door, placed a hand on his arm. "Marcus, the entire company is behind you. Our legal team has already been activated. Focus on the flight. We'll handle the rest." "I know you will," he said, gratitude in his eyes. He stepped across the threshold and into the aircraft. The familiar scent of filtered air and jet fuel was calming, a return to his element. He walked through the galley and into the cockpit, the cramped, technology-filled space that was his true office. He settled into the left-hand seat, the captain's seat, and the world outside seemed to fall away. He put on his headset, the soft padding a familiar comfort over his ears. He began to move through his pre-flight flow, his hands dancing across the array of switches, buttons, and dials with a muscle memory built over 30 years. Each action was precise, deliberate, a small victory of order over the chaos he had just escaped. David was already running through his own checks on the right side. For a few minutes, the only sounds in the cockpit were the quiet clicks of switches and their call and response as they worked through the checklist. "Yaw damper? Checked. Fuel pumps? On. Hydraulics? Pressure normal." It was a litany, a calming ritual of professionalism that washed away the lingering stain of Jensen's abuse. In here, he was not a suspect. He was not a profile. He was the commander. Once the checklist was complete, he keyed the intercom. His voice, when it came out, was the epitome of calm authority, the classic pilot's voice that has reassured nervous flyers for generations. There was no hint of the trauma he had just experienced. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Marcus Thorne. I'd like to sincerely apologize for the delay this morning. We had an unforeseen security issue here at the gate that has now been fully resolved. We are currently coordinating with air traffic control to get a new departure time, and I expect we'll have that for you shortly. We appreciate your patience and understanding. We'll do everything we can to make up for the lost time once we're in the air. We thank you for flying with us today." He released the button. It was a masterclass in understatement. An unforeseen security issue. He had given the passengers the information they needed without inflaming the situation, preserving the professional integrity of the flight. Back in the terminal, Evelyn Reed was walking briskly away from the gate, her phone pressed to her ear. She was no longer speaking to station-level employees. She was on a conference call with the airline's vice president of operations and the chief legal officer in Chicago. "No, it's not a misunderstanding," she said, her voice low and intense. "I have visual confirmation of bruises on his wrists. The entire incident was filmed by multiple passengers. The detaining officer has a history of similar complaints and acted with blatant racial animus." She listened for a moment, then continued. "The captain is, miraculously, fit to fly and is proceeding with the departure. But that doesn't change our position. This is an unacceptable liability. It's a fundamental breach of our security agreement and an assault on our employee." Another pause. "Yes, I agree. A public statement will be necessary, but we need to control the narrative. First, we secure all the evidence. I have the officer's name and badge number. Sergeant Miller of the PAPD is cooperating." She stopped walking and looked out the window at the aircraft being pushed back from the gate. Captain Thorne, now at the controls, guiding the massive machine toward the runway. "I am recommending we terminate the security contract with Aegis Secure Services, effective immediately. We can enact the emergency clause in our agreement and transition to a backup provider while we source a permanent replacement. We cannot have our crews, especially our crews of color, walking through this airport wondering if the people paid to protect them are actually their biggest threat." The voice on the other end of the line gave the authorization she was seeking. "Consider it done," Evelyn said. "I'll have the formal notification drafted by our legal team here and delivered within the hour." As Flight 815 taxied toward the runway, its powerful engines whining to life, a corporate decision had been made that would sever a 30-year relationship and send shockwaves through the airport's entire security infrastructure. Captain Thorne was back in control of his aircraft, but on the ground, Evelyn Reed had just taken control of the war. Before Flight 815 had even reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the incident at Gate B42 had escaped the confines of the airport and was multiplying across the internet at the speed of light. The digital witnesses had released their testimony. The first video to go viral was a 45-second clip, shaky but brutally clear. It started just as Jensen was shoving Captain Thorne against the glass wall. The audio was sharp, capturing Jensen's shouted commands and the horrified gasps of the passengers. The most damning moment was the unmistakable metallic click-click of the handcuffs being secured around the captain's wrists. The video ended as Jensen led a shackled Marcus away from the gate. The user who uploaded it to Twitter, a businessman on his way to a tech conference in San Francisco, had tagged the airline, the airport, and 2 major news outlets. He captioned it, "At O'Hare Airport, security just arrested our United pilot for being a pilot? The man did nothing. This is an absolute disgrace. Flight 815 to SFO." Within an hour, it had 100,000 views. By the time Marcus was leveling the plane off above the clouds, it had 1 million. The comments section was a torrent of outrage. Former pilots, flight attendants, and aviation professionals weighed in, universally condemning the security officer's actions as a shocking breach of protocol. Civil rights activists and lawyers identified the clear racial bias at play. Everyday travelers expressed their disgust and support for the captain. The story was picked up by local news blogs, then national outlets. The initial headlines were stark and sensational. "Shocking video, United pilot arrested at gate," and "Airport security cuffs black pilot in front of passengers." The airlines and airport's social media accounts were inundated with thousands of angry messages demanding an explanation. Back at O'Hare, in the quiet, carpeted offices of the Port Authority Police Department, the digital firestorm was quickly becoming a real-world crisis. Sergeant Miller's report had landed on his commander's desk with the force of a grenade. It was a damning account, methodically detailing Jensen's insubordination, his lies, and his reckless disregard for procedure. coupled with Evelyn Reed's formal ice-cold notification that United Airlines was terminating its security contract, the department was in full-blown panic mode. Officer Jensen had been ordered back to the precinct, where he was told to write his own statement. He sat in a small, empty briefing room, the adrenaline of the morning long gone, replaced by a cold, sour dread. He tried to frame his report in a way that made his actions seem reasonable, a necessary response to a potential threat. But the words felt hollow even to him. How could he describe Marcus's calm demeanor as non-compliant without sounding like a liar? How could he justify cuffing a man before verifying his identity? The video he now knew was circulating online made his written defense almost pointless. The digital witness was more powerful than any report he could write. Around 2 p.m., as Flight 815 began its descent toward the California coast, Jensen was summoned to the office of the Chief of Airport Police. The chief, a man who usually dealt with budgets and civic meetings, looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. "Jensen," the chief said, his voice flat and exhausted, "I've read Miller's report. I've read your statement, and I've seen the video that half the country is watching right now." He gestured to his computer monitor, where the viral clip was paused on a frame of Marcus pressed against the glass. "Chief, the video doesn't show the whole context," Jensen began. "The context," the chief cut in, "is that you detained a senior airline captain without cause, put him in handcuffs based on a feeling, and have now cost this department its most lucrative security contract and made this airport the face of a national scandal." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. Turn in your badge and service weapon to your supervisor. You are not to set foot on airport property until this investigation is concluded." The words hit Jensen like a physical blow. Administrative leave. It was the first step toward termination. He had been so sure of himself, so certain in his authority. Now, that authority was gone, his identity as a police officer stripped away. "Chief, I was doing my job," he said, his voice pleading. "No," the chief replied, his eyes cold. "You were being a bully and a bigot. Now get out of my office." Jensen walked out of the chief's office in a daze. In the hallway, he saw Sergeant Miller, who looked at him not with anger, but with a profound, weary sadness. The weight of his wrong decision was now crushing him. Meanwhile, on social media, a new hashtag had started trending. Hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. It was attached to thousands of posts, not just about Captain Thorne, but from other black pilots, flight attendants, and passengers sharing their own stories of being questioned, doubted, and harassed in airports. The incident at Gate B-42 was no longer just about one officer and one pilot. It had become a symbol of a much larger systemic problem. The digital witness wasn't just showing what had happened, it was showing why it mattered. The Internal Affairs Office was located in a drab, nondescript building a few miles from the airport. It was a place where careers came to die, and the air inside was heavy with the ghosts of past investigations. 2 days after being placed on leave, Jensen sat at a metal table in a small, soundproofed interview room. The confidence he once projected was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive posture. Across from him sat 2 investigators, a man and a woman, both with impassive faces and notebooks filled with questions. A video camera in the corner recorded the proceedings. This was not a conversation, it was a dissection. "Officer Jensen, thank you for coming in," the male investigator, Detective Harding, began, his voice neutral. "We're here to review the incident at Gate B-42 on the morning of October 12th. We have your written statement, Sergeant Miller's report, and several witness accounts. We also have the terminal security footage and the body cam footage from your uniform." Jensen nodded, swallowing hard. The body cam. He had forgotten about it in the heat of the moment, a silent, objective observer strapped to his own chest, recording his every word, his every action. "Let's start at the beginning," said the female investigator, Detective Chen. "Your body cam shows you observing the crew boarding for several minutes. We see you allow a white male pilot, a white female flight attendant, and another white male first officer to pass without stopping them. You then step directly into the path of Captain Thorne. Can you explain the difference in your approach? I was conducting random screenings, Jensen said, reciting a line he had rehearsed. It was his turn. Harding slid a photo across the table. It was a still from the security camera, showing Jensen watching the crew, his eyes already locked on Marcus long before he reached the checkpoint. This footage suggests your focus was on Captain Thorne before he even got to you. It doesn't look random, it looks targeted. I had a gut feeling, Jensen stammered. Something seemed off. What specifically seemed off? Chen pressed. His demeanor. He was too calm, too confident. It struck me as suspicious. So, a pilot acting calm and confident on his way to his aircraft is suspicious to you? Harding asked, raising an eyebrow. Captain Thorne provided his credentials immediately upon request. Your body cam audio is very clear. He asks you to verify them. Why didn't you? I needed to control the situation first, Jensen argued. He was becoming argumentative. Chen picked up a transcript. Let's review the argument. Captain Thorne says, quote, "Officer, my flight is scheduled for departure. You can scan my badge right here, or you can call the airline's operations center. They'll verify my identity in 30 seconds. Then you reply, quote, "Don't tell me how to do my job. You people always have an answer for everything, don't you?" She looked up from the page, her gaze sharp. Officer Jensen, who did you mean by you people? Jensen's face flushed. I meant people who question authority. Really? Harding said, his voice laced with skepticism. Because a moment later you told him the uniform doesn't look right on you. In what way did a standard airline-issued captain's uniform not look right on a 52-year-old man? Jensen was silent. There was no good answer. Every justification he offered was being systematically dismantled by his own words, his own actions, captured on video. His alibi wasn't one of procedure. It was an alibi of bias. Chen continued. Let's move on to the use of force. Captain Thorne is standing still. He makes no threatening moves. Yet you shove him against the window and place him in handcuffs. Your own body cam shows him stating clearly, "I am not resisting you." Yet you shout, "Stop resisting." Why the discrepancy, officer? In a high-stress situation, you have to assert control, Jensen said, his voice weak. I perceived his refusal to put his hands on the glass as resistance. He was asking you why, Harding said. He was asserting his civil rights. That is not the same as resisting arrest. You had his identification. You had a computer terminal and a radio. You had a dozen ways to de-escalate, and you chose the one path that guaranteed escalation. You chose violence. The investigator then opened a thick file on the table. This is not the first time your judgment has been called into question, is it, Officer Jensen? We have 3 other formal complaints filed against you in the last 5 years, all from black men. 1 a businessman, 1 a doctor, 1 a student. All of them accuse you of overly aggressive stops, baseless accusations, and demeaning language. All of them were unsustained because it was your word against theirs. But this time there are videos. Jensen stared at the file. Those other incidents had been whispers, minor annoyances that his supervisors had brushed aside. He had always been protected. He had always been believed. He had built a career on the assumption that the authority of his badge was absolute. Those were different situations, he muttered. Were they? Chen asked. Or were they just rehearsals for what happened at Gate B42? Were they all instances of you seeing a black man in a position of success or authority and being unable to accept it? A doctor, a businessman, a pilot. The room was quiet. Jensen had no more answers. His justifications had evaporated under the bright, hot light of scrutiny. The investigators weren't just looking at one incident. They were looking at a pattern of behavior that was not about security, but about prejudice. He hadn't been making a judgment call based on a threat. He had been acting on a deeply ingrained bias that saw a black captain as an impossibility, a lie that needed to be exposed. And in his zeal to expose that perceived lie, he had exposed a much uglier truth about himself. His alibi was gone. All that was left was the evidence. 2 days after the incident, in a high-rise law office in downtown Chicago with panoramic views of Lake Michigan, Captain Marcus Thorne sat at a long, polished mahogany table. He was out of uniform, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. The bruises on his wrists had faded to a sickly yellow-green, a physical reminder of the ordeal. Across from him sat 2 of the airline's top litigators and Evelyn Reed, who had flown in from the airport specifically for this meeting. The mood in the room was somber but resolute. "Marcus, first and foremost, how are you doing?" asked the lead attorney, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Eleanor Vance. "I'm still processing it," Marcus admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been flying for 30 years. I've faced emergencies, terrible weather, mechanical failures. I've never felt as helpless as I did when that man put his hands on me." "What you experienced was an assault, plain and simple," Vance stated, "and it was motivated by racial discrimination. The evidence is overwhelming. We have the videos, the witness statements, and the officer's own history. The question before us now is how we move forward." "The airline has already terminated the contract with the security firm Aegis Secure," Evelyn added. "And Officer Jensen has been suspended and will almost certainly be fired. Those are the immediate corporate and administrative responses. But Eleanor believes, and I agree, that this calls for a stronger, more personal response from you, Marcus, if you choose to pursue it." Marcus looked at Vance. "What are you proposing?" Vance leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "We are proposing that you, with the full and unconditional backing of this airline, file a federal lawsuit. We will sue both Officer Jensen individually and his employer, Aegis Secure Services, as a corporate entity." She paused, letting the weight of the statement settle in. "The suit would be for multiple claims: unlawful detention, use of excessive force, assault and battery, racial discrimination, defamation of character, for accusing you of being an impersonator, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Marcus was silent for a moment, contemplating. He wasn't a litigious man. He preferred to solve problems quietly, professionally. But what had happened to him wasn't quiet. It was a loud, public, and deliberate act of humiliation. "What would a lawsuit accomplish?" he asked, "beyond a monetary settlement?" "Accountability," Vance said, her voice firm. "It would force Aegis Secure to answer for their hiring and training practices in a federal court. It would make your testimony and the evidence part of a permanent public record. But most importantly, it sends a message. It sends a message to every airport, every security contractor, and every law enforcement officer in this country that there is a severe price to be paid for this kind of behavior. It tells them that they cannot hide behind a badge to justify their prejudice." "And the settlement?" Marcus asked. "Given the egregious nature of the conduct, the public humiliation, the professional harm, and the clear evidence, we would be seeking a significant amount," Vance said. "We are recommending you file for $12 million. The number hung in the air, vast and almost abstract. $12 million. Marcus took a deep breath. "That's a staggering amount of money." "It's not just about the money, Marcus," Vance explained gently. "It's a figure that reflects the severity of the violation. It's a number that a corporation cannot ignore. It's the price of your dignity, a dignity they tried to strip from you in front of the entire world." Evelyn Reed reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "Marcus, the decision is entirely yours. If you want to let this go, the airline will still support you in every way. But if you want to fight, we will fund this entire lawsuit. You will not pay a single dollar out of pocket. We will put the best legal minds in the country on your case. This wasn't just an attack on you, it was an attack on one of ours. It was an attack on our values." Marcus looked down at his hands, then at the faint marks still visible on his wrists. He thought about the smirk on Jensen's face, He thought about the cold click of the handcuffs. He thought about the "you don't fit the profile" and "the uniform doesn't look right on you." He thought about all the other times in his life and in his career that he had faced quieter, more subtle forms of prejudice. The surprise in a passenger's eyes, the double-take from a gate agent, the slightly too long pause from an air traffic controller. He had always absorbed them, pushed past them, and proven his worth through his impeccable professionalism. But this was different. This was a line that had been crossed in the most brutal and public way. If he let this go, what would happen to the next black pilot or doctor or businessman who ran into an officer like Jensen? He looked up, his eyes meeting Eleanor Vance's. The quiet resolve was back in his voice. "I don't want a quiet settlement or a simple apology," he said. "I want to ensure this never happens to anyone else." He took a breath. "File the lawsuit." Vance nodded, a small, determined smile on her face. "They picked a fight with the wrong pilot, Captain." The decision was made. The price of dignity had been set at $12 million, and they were about to send the bill. The lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois the following morning. The moment the electronic filing was accepted by the court, a press release, meticulously crafted by the airline's communication team and vetted by Eleanor Vance, was sent to every major news outlet in the country. The story exploded. The initial viral video had been a flash fire, but the announcement of a $12 million federal lawsuit was a sustained earthquake. It elevated the incident from a shocking social media moment to a major national news story with significant legal and financial ramifications. Headlines appeared on the homepages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. United Airlines backs black captain in $12 million lawsuit over wrongful arrest. Racial profiling at 30,000 feet. Pilot sues security firm after humiliating detention. O'Hare Airport scandal. Security contract terminated. Federal lawsuit alleges systemic bias. The 28-page legal complaint was a masterwork of cold, factual fury. It laid out the timeline of events in excruciating detail, quoting Jensen's own words as captured on his body cam. It cited federal and state civil rights laws that had been violated. It detailed Captain Thorne's distinguished career, contrasting it with Officer Jensen's history of complaints. And it named not only Jensen as a defendant, but also his employer, Aegis Secure Services, accusing the company of negligent hiring, inadequate training, and fostering a culture that allowed racial bias to go unchecked. The scandal took flight, dominating the news cycle. Aviation industry experts were brought onto news programs to discuss airport security protocols, universally agreeing that Jensen's actions were an indefensible anomaly. Civil rights leaders used the case as a powerful, high-profile example of how racial bias manifests even in professions that are supposed to be merit-based. Aegis Secure Services, a company that prided itself on its low-profile efficiency, was suddenly thrust into a harsh and unforgiving public spotlight. Their initial response was a terse, defensive statement. Aegis Secure Services is aware of the lawsuit. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are conducting our own internal review. We do not comment on pending litigation. The statement did nothing to quell the firestorm. In fact, its cold corporate tone only added fuel to the public outrage. The company's stock price took a noticeable dip as investors grew nervous about the potential financial and reputational fallout. Other airports and airlines that held contracts with Aegis began to quietly review their agreements, wondering if they were exposed to similar liabilities. The airport authority, desperate to distance itself from the scandal, released its own statement, emphasizing that Officer Jensen was an employee of a third-party contractor, not the city or the Port Authority Police. They pledged to launch a full-scale review of all security contracts and protocols to ensure that every passenger and employee is treated with dignity and respect. The story became a fixture on morning talk shows and evening news broadcasts. The video of Marcus being cuffed was played on a loop, a constant, damning visual indictment. Photos of Captain Thorne, looking dignified and professional in his uniform, were juxtaposed with a scowling mugshot of Officer Jensen that a news outlet had managed to dig up from a minor infraction years ago. The narrative was clear and compelling. A respected hero had been victimized by a prejudiced bully. For Marcus, the media frenzy was overwhelming. He was inundated with requests for interviews, which he declined on the advice of his legal team. He was recognized everywhere he went, not as an anonymous pilot, but as that pilot. People would stop him in the street or in grocery stores to offer words of support, to shake his hand, to thank him for standing up. He became an reluctant public figure, a symbol of grace under pressure. The pressure on Aegis Secure was mounting from all sides. Their largest client at O'Hare had publicly fired them. They were facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from one of the world's biggest airlines. Their name was being dragged through the mud on national television every night, and the man at the center of it all, Captain Marcus Thorne, had become a national hero, while their employee had become a villain. The scandal, born in a few minutes of baseless suspicion at Gate B42, now had a life of its own. It had taken flight, soaring across the country, forcing a conversation that was long overdue about bias, power, and the assumptions we make about the people who serve us. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal filing, it was a public trial, and the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. The fallout for Aegis Secure Services was swift and brutal. The termination of the United Airlines contract was the first domino to fall, and it was a massive one. It represented nearly a third of their revenue at the O'Hare hub and was one of their most prestigious accounts. The public nature of the firing sent a clear signal to the rest of the industry. Association with Aegis was now toxic. Within a week of the lawsuit being filed, 2 other major airlines operating out of O'Hare announced that they were placing their own contracts with Aegis under review, a corporate euphemism for, "We are looking for the emergency exit." The airport authority, under immense pressure from the mayor's office and the public, formally notified Aegis that their master contract for terminal-wide security would not be renewed at the end of the year. The empire that Aegis had built at the world's busiest airport was crumbling. For Officer James Jensen, the administrative leave had been a strange limbo, a period of forced inaction where he could do nothing but watch his life unravel on television. He had been ordered not to speak to the media, but he saw his name and face plastered everywhere. He saw himself vilified, turned into a caricature of a racist cop. He felt a surge of self-pity and anger, still unable to grasp that his own actions were the sole cause of his predicament. He blamed Captain Thorne for being arrogant, the airline for overreacting, and the media for a witch hunt. His official termination came via a cold, impersonal courier. It was a single-page letter from Aegis Secure's Human Resources Department. It cited gross misconduct, failure to follow established security protocols, and actions detrimental to the company's reputation and business interests as the reasons for his immediate dismissal. After 15 years of service, his career was over, ended by a form letter. There was no hearing, no final appeal. The company was cutting its losses, and he was the first thing to be thrown overboard. The company's internal investigation, which had been promised in their initial press statement, concluded with a public announcement. The CEO of Aegis Secure, a man rarely seen outside of corporate boardrooms, held a press conference. He looked beleaguered and stressed. The actions of former employee James Jensen were appalling and inexcusable, the CEO read from a prepared statement. They do not reflect the values or the training of our organization. Mr. Jensen acted alone, in clear violation of our policies. We offer our deepest apologies to Captain Marcus Thorne and to United Airlines. To demonstrate our commitment to preventing such an incident from ever happening again, we will be implementing a company-wide mandatory retraining program on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and unconscious bias. It was a desperate attempt at damage control, but it was too little too late. The promises of retraining sounded hollow in the face of the video evidence. To many, the CEO's statement sounded less like a sincere apology and more like an attempt to insulate the corporation from the legal and financial consequences of its employees' actions by painting him as a lone wolf. Eleanor Vance, Marcus's lawyer, responded with a blistering statement of her own. Aegis Secure's attempt to scapegoat a single employee is predictable and disingenuous, she told the press. Our lawsuit alleges that Officer Jensen is not an anomaly, but a product of a corporate culture that failed to properly screen, train, and supervise its personnel. One man's prejudice lit the match, but Aegis Secure provided the kindling. We look forward to proving that in court. The broken contract and Jensen's firing were significant victories, but they were only the beginning. The lawsuit was still moving forward. The legal process of discovery began, forcing Aegis to turn over years of internal documents. Jensen's complete personnel file, including the previously unsustained complaints, internal emails regarding security protocols, and, most damningly, their training materials, which lawyers would later argue were woefully inadequate on the subjects of racial bias and conflict de-escalation. The contract that had been broken was more than just a business agreement. It was a symbol of the trust that had been shattered. It was the concrete consequence of a decision made in a moment of unchecked prejudice. The firing of Jensen was the accountability for the man, but the breaking of the contract and the ongoing lawsuit were the accountability for the system that had empowered him. For Marcus, this was the core of his fight. It wasn't just about punishing one man, it was about fixing the broken system that had allowed him to flourish. A week after the lawsuit was filed, after consulting extensively with his legal team and the airline, Captain Marcus Thorne agreed to make his first and only public statement. He would not take questions. He would simply speak, to tell his side of the story in his own words. The press conference was held in a large conference room at a downtown hotel, chosen for its neutral ground. The room was packed with reporters, television cameras, and photographers. When Marcus walked to the podium, flanked by Eleanor Vance and Evelyn Reed, a hush fell over the room. He looked composed and dignified in his full captain's uniform. It was a deliberate choice. He was reclaiming the symbol that Jensen had tried to defile. He approached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the sea of faces and lenses. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. His voice, when he spoke, was the same calm, commanding voice he used in the cockpit. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Marcus Thorne, and I am a captain for United Airlines. For 30 years, I have had the privilege of wearing this uniform. To me, it represents responsibility, trust, and an unwavering commitment to the safety of my passengers and my crew. It is a uniform I have earned through decades of training, dedication, and service." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A week ago, in my own airport, on my way to my own aircraft, that uniform was not enough. My pilot's license was not enough. My airline identification was not enough. My word was not enough. An officer, entrusted with the security of the airport, looked at me and decided that I did not belong. He decided that the color of my skin was a contradiction to the uniform I was wearing. He saw not a pilot, but a problem." He spoke without notes, his gaze steady. He didn't recount the details of the assault. The world had already seen the videos. Instead, he spoke about what it meant. "The humiliation I endured was not just personal. It was an affront to every person of color who has ever had to prove they deserve to be in a room, to hold a position, to wear a uniform they have rightfully earned. This incident was not about a misunderstanding. It was about a dangerous and deeply ingrained bias that sees black success as a reason for suspicion, not celebration." His voice remained even, but it was imbued with a powerful emotional weight. "I was fortunate. I was fortunate that my crew and my airline stood by me. I was fortunate that passengers were willing to bear witness. I was fortunate that I have the resources to seek justice. But what about those who are not so fortunate? What about the man or woman on the street who faces this kind of abuse without a flight crew to back them up or a corporation to defend them. This was the heart of his message. He was using his platform, the one this traumatic event had thrust upon him, to speak for those who could not. This lawsuit is not just about me. It is about accountability. It is about forcing a system to change. It's about ensuring that security is never again used as a code word for prejudice. It's about creating a world where a young black child can see a pilot's uniform and dream of wearing it one day, without ever having to fear that they might be punished for achieving that dream. He looked directly into the cameras, his eyes conveying a profound sense of purpose. I am a pilot. It is not what I do, it is who I am. And I will not allow anyone to make me, or anyone who looks like me, feel like an impersonator in our own lives. I look forward to my day in court. Thank you. With that, he stepped back from the podium. He did not look at the shouting reporters. He simply gave a slight nod to Eleanor and Evelyn, and the three of them walked out of the room. His statement was electrifying. It was broadcast on every news channel and quoted in every newspaper. It was powerful not because of any soaring rhetoric, but because of its quiet, undeniable truth. He had taken a moment of profound personal humiliation and transformed it into a national call for change. He wasn't just a victim or a plaintiff anymore, he had become a leader. The podium was not an endpoint, it was the beginning of a new flight plan, one aimed at a destination where dignity was not up for debate. The legal battle that followed was not a battle at all, it was a surrender. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable video evidence, the history of complaints against Jensen, and the powerful public testimony of Captain Thorne, Aegis Secure Services knew a trial would be a corporate suicide mission. After months of legal maneuvering, their lawyers approached Eleanor Vance with a settlement offer. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end to a very loud public scandal. The terms were not made public, but sources close to the case leaked that the final amount was substantial, exceeding the initial $12 million sought after legal fees were factored in. More importantly, the settlement included non-financial terms that Marcus had insisted upon. Aegis Secure was forced to work with the Department of Justice to completely overhaul its training programs nationwide, creating a new curriculum, co-designed by civil rights organizations, focused on identifying and combating implicit bias. The Captain Thorne initiative became a mandatory part of training for every new and existing Aegis employee. Captain Thorne continued to fly. In the months and years that followed, something in the airports began to shift. He would walk through terminals and see a new kind of recognition in the eyes of security personnel, not just from Aegis, but from the TSA and other agencies as well. His case had become a cautionary tale, a training scenario, a stark reminder of the cost of prejudice. He had wanted to make a change, and he had. The echo of what happened at Gate B42 reverberated through concourses across the country. The glass wall at Gate B42 where he had been pinned is still there, reflecting the endless stream of travelers chasing schedules and dreams. The gate number may change, the airline liveries may be updated, but the memory of that morning remains, embedded in the airport's DNA. It serves as a silent testament to a moment when authority was challenged by dignity, and dignity won. The cameras that recorded the incident have long since been replaced by newer models, but the digital footage lives on, a permanent, unblinking witness in the vast archive of the internet, forever telling the story of the pilot who was told he didn't belong and the system he forced to change. It's easy to condemn a man like James Jensen, to label him a monster and move on. But the truly unsettling part of his story is not his monstrosity, but his ordinary nature. What led him to that moment of irreversible crisis? Perhaps it was a life of quiet insecurities, a feeling of being overlooked, that made the authority of a uniform so intoxicating. The badge and the gun may have been a shield, not for the public, but for a fragile ego that equated respect with fear. In his world, power wasn't a responsibility, it was a tool to make others feel as small as he secretly felt. He didn't see a decorated captain, he saw a man who, in his twisted view, possessed a level of confidence and status that a black man shouldn't have, and it offended his sense of order. The tragedy is that his attempt to assert his own value was built entirely on devaluing another man. And what of Captain Thorne? We celebrate his composure, his heroic calm. But one must wonder about the cost of that composure.
What if he had raised his voice?
What if his military training hadn't kicked in and he had reacted with the raw, human anger that any man would feel in that situation? The narrative could have shifted so easily. The story might have become about an unruly man rather than an unjust system. His victory in many ways depended on him being perfect in a moment of extreme imperfection. Perhaps the truest measure of a person's character is not how they act when things are going their way, but how they maintain their dignity when someone is trying with all their might to take it away. The core of this story is a simple yet profound truth. Prejudice is a filter that distorts reality. For Officer Jensen, that filter was so thick it rendered Captain Thorne's 4 golden stripes invisible, transforming a hero into a threat. This wasn't a failure of security protocols, it was a failure of basic human perception. It reminds us that accountability is not just about punishing the guilty, but about creating systems that protect the innocent from a prejudice that can, in an instant, turn a routine morning into a life-altering nightmare. What would you have done if you were a passenger witnessing this event? At what point does a bystander have a responsibility to become an advocate? And more broadly, do you believe true change comes from firing one bad apple, or does it require a fundamental rethinking of the entire system that allowed him to act in the first place? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please support our channel by subscribing for more stories that need to be heard.